Sorry for that. Okay, I'm going to talk about my 3 years and what I found challenging and what I discovered also important for the ISSTI community. When I came here in 2011, October, I had a story. My story of things that I observed in the field, of a story that I knew for almost 5 years. And I had a consolidated understanding of what I wanted to talk about. Some things that I know all my life. Some I knew for 10 years after working in the sector for 10 years. And specifically, some which I knew for 5 years, where I worked with a certain program. So I was clear of my story. And my story was about how to promote innovation in subsistence agriculture through a deliberate public action, because this is pretty common, that there is a program, there is a project that goes to Africa with a log frame, detailed information, activities and budgets and expected results. That is typical of development programs that go to Africa. And when I applied and after I applied, I was sure that my story was very ISSTI. To give a bit of a background of the story is that DFID had a research strategy where a lot of pounds were invested in. And 10 years down the line, they made an assessment of what they funded and the impact, and the return to investment was almost nothing. So the question was, before, as they were writing the strategy, researchers had argued that the reason why African agriculture is underperforming is because there are no appropriate technologies which are appropriate for Africa. So if we could generate these appropriate technologies, the right varieties which are resistant to our pest, resistant to drought and so on, then for sure African agriculture will perform. So then they put a lot of pounds, about 250 million or so, and a massive of agricultural research was done in different national agricultural research stations, somewhere regional and somewhere national. Then 10 years down the line, agriculture in Africa was still underperforming. So DFID was asking itself, so what is the problem? So they funded a 5-year program, try first to put the research outputs which were generated, because many people became professors because of the publications, and there were many PhD graduates because of that, but the farming systems were still the same and the outputs were still the same. So DFID wanted first to put these research outputs into use, which was kind of supply push, and they called it maximizing the poverty reduction potentials of the research outputs. And at the same time, to learn by action how best to put research outputs into use. So during the discussion, I won't get very long into this project because this project had a difficult start. It was like a baby with heavy pants. There was so much poo in the diaper. The baby wouldn't stand because of the academic backlog. It was still linear, put research into use. You take the outputs and put them into use, adoption from research to users, and it was more about adoption of technologies and so on. But after long discussions, it was clear that they won't learn anything, so they had to come up with different strategies. So when it came to Africa, there were 6 countries, including Tanzania, and we were to pilot. And immediately we said, if we are piloting and we are learning, then we don't need a log frame, Because once you have a log frame, you have determined everything that you want to do. But that is how the donor system works. You have to justify every penny that you want to use and explain and prove and say and put on a column what they should ask you as a return to investment. But fortunately, after 2 years, there was an agreement that all the consultants in London should stop. They were all, the contracts were, thank you to Ian Modlin. You know Ian Modlin worked here. He's a professor here, but now retired. He came as a new director, and there was a lot of changes that happened, and then there was more power at the national level on what to do. So we experimented this without a log frame, with just milestones, and we started to decide what to do depending on the context. So the project started to be shaped by the context. It was a big risk to defeat, but it paid off in the end. So I have this story that I wanted to tell, which transformed the way the rural development project should be approached. So I thought I knew what I wanted to say, and I reported, and I had written a lot about these things, and I figured that I have about 1,095 days to write that, and I've said, my goodness, this is too much. I don't need all these days. Maybe 2 years is enough. And I was saying I will graduate after 2 years. I don't have to go through 3 or 4 days, but I was dead wrong. Because I realized that PhD is more than telling a story. It's not about just telling a story that you know. It's I have to be academically correct. Else, why write it from here? I should have written it from home. I'm writing it here because it has to be academically correct. And to be academically correct means to be academically correct. And I think this is the battle of disciplines and the battle of the academics and the practitioners. So when you are academically correct, are you also politically correct or politically incorrect, and also policy also to have impact on the ground? And I think this is something that we need to really discuss as ISSTI. As we struggle to be academically correct, we should also balance on what should happen on the ground, and we have to be somewhere in the middle. And my first learning was to learn thesicism, and it meant to give my story a sense of belonging. It has to belong somewhere, theoretically, methodologically, and the content must belong somewhere. So must belong at ISSTI or social science or wherever, but I have to give it a sense of belonging. And that was a journey that I'm happy that I've been through. I realized several things, but I'm going to talk about very few. That situating my story within ISSTI wasn't a problem at all. I was doing innovation. There's that I there, so definitely its innovation is there, okay? But grounding it within the multidisciplinary twizzle within the innovation and ISSTI, I came across meanings and jargons and context that everything took me back and forth trying to get that sense of belonging. And I think it's part of being academically correct. And sometimes it can really waste your time. And I think that's the reason we need 4 years, actually. Choosing the context, the first one. As we say in most of our methodologies and ideologies within ISSTI, is that everything is context specific. The question is which context? And if it's only about that context, how do you generalize to have impact? And I think sometimes we might take this for granted because you have been doing this for too long, but I think it's important that we really collect more information and we publish more on that, because it's not as simple as you think. It's not nothing really. It's something very, very profound that need to be more audible. I'm doing agriculture, and I believe from what I want to write has impact, has influence on general agriculture. At the same time, mostly for developing economies, but maybe for Africa specifically, or maybe for the district that I interviewed or where I worked with. But all this array of contexts they are related. And sticking to the last one alone, I think we lose a lot of information that could be shared. Apart from that, I was also doing agriculture, livestock, and not crop. So it was about poultry and not about goats or cattle or maize or beans. But poultry, again, specifically the indigenous breeds. I was not talking about the poultry industry, including the improved breeds, but the rural poultry, because it's dominated by this specific breed. And I'm also talking about poultry as an activity and also as an industry, or as a sector or subsector, whatever. So putting all this together, agriculture, livestock, poultry in Africa, in developing economies in Africa, in Tanzania in that district, but at the same time, the poultry industry, analyzing innovation in an industry. In an industry, the geography and the industry as an innovation system, we shouldn't take it for granted. It's something that we need to publish properly with more examples and case studies. And I realize in the end it's about choices and how I can justify my choice. And I think there's more to that. Another thing that I learned is about being careful with meanings. Okay, so as an ISSTIaner, as a Londoner and ISSTIaner, like sociologists, even the most obvious word or terminology was ontologically loaded. If I say rural, it means it's remote, it's not urban, the infrastructure is poor, people are less learned, whatever. And then when I say local, it's not necessarily rural, it could be local, it's not improved. When I say market, when I say appropriate, when I say valued, all these, the jargon of meanings and trying to be very, very sure that you're correct and you have explained what you explained. And also, fitting in was a skill that I had to learn, because that's the title that I had to arrive from many places before I got to ISSTI. It's because I read a lot of things. I read junk, I read good stuff, I read things that I never used, but in the end, they're in my background, they helped me shape what I'm writing. I read agricultural economics, I read a lot of stuff. So I had to be in many, many places before I had to be ISSTI. I had to do all this. In the end, some of them shaped my stories, some of them are just, they're just in the background, but trust me, all of this, when we talk about multidisciplinary, we are talking about this much. And I think as important as it is, but there is a challenge there that we should not take it light, that when it comes to implementation, it's even a challenge with all the academic baggage that comes with it. That subsistence is good because it cushions people from the jaws of globalization. No, it is bad because it uses labor inefficiently, or it is commercializing is bad because you're bringing the Western ideologies to the South. It is good because we need food, it eradicates poverty. All this baggage, somehow you have to find your place. Then to finish, I found this big dilemma which I want to present to you, to East community. As I listened yesterday, I was talking to someone that the discussion in East in Edinburgh is kind of discriminating Africa. So most of the discussions are military, nuclear, cyborg, whatever. So if we could a little bit try to include in our discussion. This is the dilemma. When you have poverty reduction in the Millennium Development Goal as one of the MDGs, the world is telling Africa to eradicate poverty, to improve agricultural productivity. This means that that curve that should be flattened. Make sure that all of them, or 70%, become the early adopters at a go. And while that message goes across, there is noise, again, from academicians, from politicians, from the global community. Eradicate poverty by 2015, but don't impose. Let farmers decide what they want, let them choose. You must catch up, close the digital divide, and leave the market forces, don't give subsidies, and be environmentally friendly. Don't mechanize, whatever. All this noise comes, but meet the MDG by that time. And they have to make a choice. And there's this fact that because of climate change and the environment, and to close the gap between the poor and the rich, you must use simple technologies because these are appropriate for the poor. But in the end, they lead to low productivity. If they do this, they don't meet the MDG. Then there is an alternative from other people. You should use sophisticated technologies. You should mechanize. You should don't use the hand hoe, increase productivity by using the improved varieties and so on. And when they try to use them, they are very costly, not adaptable. They don't suit the environment, the conditions. Again, low productivity. They don't meet the MDGs. So whether they use simple technologies and appropriate, they're doomed. They use the sophisticated ones, they're doomed. So the question they ask, should we simplify the technologies, use the sophisticated ones and simplify them somehow? Or should we upgrade existing capacities? So the question is, do you simplify technologies or do you upgrade existing capacities? But donors don't fund upgrading capacities. Most of them, they don't. Because it takes a long time and it needs a lot of money. By the end of the project, when the evaluation mission comes, there will be nothing to show. So that's the dilemma that the poor countries are facing, whether we promote sophisticated or not. And so we have to interrogate existing rural development approaches. Because currently, we are building a weak sector for the weak. Because they are poor, you want poor technologies because they fit. Yeah, I'm finishing. And then we have to balance between supply push and demand pull. Either we should know when to go the Red Cross way and when we should go the MTN way. Because when MTN went to Africa with them, it was the first mobile telephone company, everybody was laughing and saying, they are living below $1 a day, they won't be able to buy mobile phones. But now they are smiling all the way to the bank because they were aggressive. But if it was agriculture, people would say, MTN, don't go because look at the poor, you are exploiting them. But because it was ICT, it was easy. And we need to understand the minimal conditions, that there are minimal conditions for innovation processes to take place. And there is a social cost on building that. If we don't build these minimal conditions, no matter what we do, innovation process won't take place. The private sector will not intervene. And we need to analyze the rural innovation space. Currently, the space is dominated by the public extension. And this public extension is limiting the innovation capacity and the information that goes there. And we need to know who is in the interaction space and whether farmers are really have access to the interaction space. And that includes putting them in the market. Now we have one extension officer who is assumed to be like Google, that he knows everything. We assume farmers are a heterogeneous group and their enterprises are the same and the way they relate to the enterprises is the same. And this one extension officer can do all that. We think this extension officer is. So finally, I wonder if ISSTI can influence how rural development is being dealt with, because for the past 50 years, we have used the same approaches and nothing is changing, and how best we can restructure agricultural systems in developing countries. Thank you.